Hello and welcome to Blunt Business for this segment of the High Five with STRAINWISE Consulting's General Counsel, Jay Kotzker. Jay, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So a lot of things happening right now. First up, Colorado legislators are taking another spin through the marijuana delivery recommendations.
That's right. So there's a new bill being debated right now, House Bill 1092. It would allow some limited delivery services in the state of Colorado, which the state currently does not have. It would provide license structure, geographic locations, the amount of product that a delivery driver could carry around at one time, a number of other things that could address a significant missing piece in Colorado.
Yeah, and so who's going to be probably at the forefront of this? Will existing dispensaries apply for a delivery license, or will you apply for a separate delivery license on your own?
I mean, I think both ways probably would work. You would have existing license holders that would want to see a way to reach a broader patient base and a broader customer base. And then at the same time, you'd have new people getting into the industry that maybe had a delivery background or had the infrastructure built out to get into that industry as well.
What are the chances of this actually coming to fruition, you think?
I think pretty good. I mean, Colorado is really, lagging behind in this part of the industry. They took a crack at it last year in Senate Bill 192, which was modeled almost identical after a new Oregon delivery service bill. But Governor John Hickenlooper, expressed some doubts about it, thought that it might, provide some, risks on the roadways, risks for the people that were actually delivering product, and then obviously open up Colorado to a little bit more federal scrutiny.
Well, and you have a client or two in northern California, where you've have applied for the delivery license for them. One of the takeaways there's a pretty well-developed market there as far as facial recognition software and things that will protect both the consumer and the business.
Absolutely, and there's plenty of technology out there that people could use. California has had a vibrant delivery market aspect of the industry for some time now, and in fact, what we're hearing out of California is delivery sales often meet or exceed retail brick and mortar sales.
Do you see an opening for a company like Ease for our listeners who aren't familiar with that California company gaining a lot of traction, raising a lot of capital? They will, if I understand correctly, deliver a box of sort of assorted goods. You get to pick out of that. Do you see that as an alternative development, meaning they're just sort of copycatting what happened and what's working there?
Perhaps. I think you'll see the industry try a lot of different avenues to see what works best here in Colorado. I would imagine that you would have people who would really like to have flower from a specific dispensary or a concentrate from a specific manufacturer. So to the extent that a box had a big variety of offerings, then maybe something like that works. Otherwise, I think what you're going to see is probably established, well-recognized dispensary chains perhaps get on the delivery bandwagon and can use their brand recognition to build a big consumer base.
Yeah, I see it as a windfall for them because you've already got a lot of marketing where you're able to get exposure to like products and things that are along the same lines as you. It's just natural. It seems a natural step for them to just deliver to your home. In addition to that, what a great opportunity for people who wanted to get in the cannabis business, couldn't afford $250,000 to build out a space, certainly several $1 million on the cultivation side, processing as well. Now they got a chance to participate in the market.
Absolutely, a lot lower barrier to entry for a delivery service. We see in California that sometimes they can be standalone services, sometimes they have to be tied to, tethered to a brick and mortar store, but they don't really have to have that much inventory. They don't have to have that big of a retail space. They can usually, office out of a place that's in maybe a less desirable part of the neighborhood. Obviously, that means a lower rent, so the overhead would probably be a little bit less. But the scrutiny, the regulatory structure, I think, will be just as robust as every other part of the industry.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it develops. There's some type of cannabis storage that happens. So people who think, well, I can just open up an office front, I don't have to have a storefront. You still have to have a secure location. You're going to spend a little bit of money procuring that real estate.
Oh, absolutely. You will have to abide by the rules and regulations that are already in place now, and they'll probably expand to include the delivery service part of it specifically. But yeah, everything from limited access areas, the security cameras, the seed to sale tracking, all of that will still be in play and be applicable to a delivery service.
And so what are the chances of this actually coming to fruition, and what's the timetable for it?
Sure. So the legislative session is ongoing. So I would imagine it's going to go through a couple amendments. The vote will be coming up in another couple weeks. Chances of success, I think it's really a crapshoot. This is not the first time that this concept has been brought in front of the Colorado legislature. As I mentioned, that they attempted to do this last year, and there was some pushback from the governor. The governor hasn't changed, so I would imagine there's probably still going to be some pushback with Sessions' rescission of the Cole memo. Maybe that leads him to really push the legislator to pump the brakes on this. But it's a big segment of the industry that's not being serviced here in Colorado, and it could increase tax revenue at a time when we're seeing recreational sales kind of plateau out.
Yeah, and this is wonderful how it's developed, kind of in a sneaky way, but a good sneaky way. And when you contrast this with what happened in California, where you're having all these alliances being formed, sort of along the lines of that co-op model, where they're having to actually hire lobbyists to get delivery service, and here we are in Colorado, tip of the cap to us sort of leading the industry and how to get things done more efficiently.
Absolutely. We'll keep an eye on it.
Absolutely. Okay, so moving on to number 2. California's Treasurer and Attorney General will study whether the state should create its own publicly owned bank to serve the state's now legal cannabis industry.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story coming out of California. Treasurer John Chiang, he was also going to be running for governor, said that his office is looking into the cost, the security risk, the legality of forming essentially a private bank in the state that would just service this industry.
Well, and so how does this work? I mean, they're obviously not going to be FDI insured. First of all, this is wonderful, right? This is a great little, it puts pressure, it's needed. A lot of times when I see new technology coming on or new businesses forming, I worry about these companies because they're doing something to sort of solve a short-term problem. Cashless and all these things, and it's like, gosh, I hope you're not spending a lot of money on that because legalization could happen or something like that. But along the banking front, things have been extremely stagnant. And so to see California doing what California does and saying, look, we'll create our own banks, I think it's wonderful. Do you worry at all about a lack of FDI insurance or anything like that?
Yeah, and I think they would have to go through the same process as we've seen other public banks go through. Especially we've seen Fourth Quarter Credit Union here in Colorado, and they've been met time and again with roadblocks trying to get that up and running.
Yeah.
So the success of how a state would do that, I'm not entirely sure, but they certainly have a little bit more clout when dealing with the Federal Reserve trying to get a master account. But it would be interesting because it wouldn't be a bank funded by private investors. It would be a public bank open to the public and hopefully would provide a much needed service to the industry.
Yeah, when you start looking into this, it gets fairly complicated. So Fourth Corner Credit Union you alluded to, they're a Colorado bank, but they're regulated by the Kansas City Fed. Things get really, really complicated, and now you're trying to sort of marry. I wish it was just as simple as a private business wanted to do something, and then customers could come and support it, understanding there's a slight risk, keeping their deposits low. I wish it could kind of move along that way, but it's actually more complicated than that.
Absolutely. I mean, you certainly want to have insurance on the amount of funds that you have holding for other people, and so as you've seen Fourth Quarter Credit Union do, they apply for a master account so they can have that fall under the federal system and provide that that security and reassurance to its customers. So perhaps stepping aside from that and serving the industry and having the industry accept the risks with hey, we're not FDIC insured, but we're still going to give you a banking option, could develop really well.
Could this change anything in banking in general, or is this just an outlier where they're serving the cannabis industry? Does this represent a bigger, broader federal break from banks? I mean, you need that insurance, don't you?
Absolutely, and I think what we have seen, and it's growing exponentially, is just kind of a general dissatisfaction with with private banks, right? The fees, the service fees that go into it, the additional scrutiny, especially when dealing with cannabis businesses, even if they're ancillary businesses, they don't touch the plant. So providing a solution that provides a little bit more security than dealing just in cash, albeit without some insurance security behind it, I think is still probably a good idea.
Great. Is there anything else you would add along the banking front and anything else we should watch out for?
No, but we can come back and talk a little bit more about fourth quarter in coming weeks. It's a fascinating story that they've attempted to get this master account for several years now, have undergone a significant amount of litigation trying to get to this point, and they've actually shifted their model from now, hey, we want to bank the cannabis industry, to hey, we want to bank ancillary businesses to the cannabis industry or lobbying groups to the cannabis industry. So they're tweaking their mission and their goals to try to get in and to build a little bit of confidence and establish themselves, and then hopefully expand out from there.
Excellent. So different topic but same industry. California tax officials are quietly working with the national bank to accept tax payments.
Absolutely. This is kind of like a salacious headline, right? It's like behind the scenes, surreptitious meetings. But that's exactly what's happening. So the state of California is working with Bank of America, who handles all of their tax money, right? Mm-hmm. So what they're doing now is they're secretly meeting with taxpayers who are in the industry, whether they're licensees at some point. Some of these people are still kind of gray market operators, but working towards getting their licenses. But they're actually meeting. There's representatives from the state tax board that are meeting at a bank, at the Bank of America branch, with these licensees who turn over what they call boatloads of cash, and then the bank will turn around and count the money and deposit the money into the state's account and automatically debit the taxpayer's tax liability. So it's just a really interesting way that that they're working with a large bank who would never bank a cannabis client ever. Right. We right now anyway. To still work and to accept cannabis cash, essentially.
If we weren't in this industry so long and doing what we're doing, I would tell you this sounds incredibly inefficient, but that's cannabis.
Yeah, it's definitely inefficient. You got to figure this is not only going to be collecting the sales tax on cannabis, but also the retail excise tax that licensees, producers, and manufacturers will have to pay, and the wholesale taxes that manufacturers are going to have to pay as well. So you're talking about a significant amount of money that is going to be brought in cash to a Bank of America building, serviced by Bank of America employees who are probably extremely nervous about this, and then benefiting the state. At the same time, Bank of America will reject every single cannabis client who walks in the door.
Right. Okay, a lot about California in this episode of the High Five, but there is some uncertainty in the California market regarding regulatory compliance. How about this? We play a game. We play true false. Okay. So this is great for people who are listening, looking to get in the industry, and there's so much information out there, and they can't always, rarely have access to someone like you who is a cannabis insider, general counsel for STRAINWISE Consulting. This is what you do every day. So it's a real treat to have you on and do this, but let's give them some free information and some guidance here. Not legal guidance. Do you need to do your disclosure?
This is not legal guidance.
This is not legal guidance. Not from me. It's never legal guidance from me.
No. And this we'll play this game, but it's really just kind of identifying some of the hot button issues that operators in the state of California are running into. There's some uncertainty. There's some questions about where do these people that have kind of temporary licenses fall? What regulations do they have to follow? And I think this would hopefully be a good way to provide a little bit of clarity on that.
Let's do it. And for the record, even though I'm not an attorney, I also buy my shirts at Costco. You
awesome.
can see
That's good.
Is that where you got yours?
I don't know.
That's nice. Okay, your wife got it for you. This one's on. It was special.
It's good.
But it's still Tommy Hilfiger.
Is that no iron?
It's like $6.
No
yes,
iron.
No iron
Awesome.
And no fit also, which is rare. Okay, so true or false? During the transition period, licensees can buy cannabis product from unlicensed collectives.
False.
And the transition period is between now and July of this year.
Correct. So this is the transition period is kind of this this loose period where people are allowed to kind of transition towards the regulated market. Some of these people have local licenses and then are working towards getting their state licenses, so they're kind of in a temporary status right now. So to answer that, false. Once you're in the transition period, you can only buy and sell from other people that are in the transition period. And I think we've seen significant shortages in product in the state of California since the rollout in January, and this is why this is happening. Because you have all of these producers, all these manufacturers of cannabis products and cannabis flower that are maybe not in the transition period, and they can't sell their product to anyone who is in the transition period already.
Yeah, and so it's just temporary licenses. I hope people aren't taking this as a way to do business, and they're seriously making a legitimate push to get this worked out, get their licenses handled whether it's calling you or getting the state license or someone that can expedite this in an affordable manner. But I hope they're taking this July 1st deadline seriously.
Oh, they absolutely will, and I think you're going to see the state come out with some really stringent enforcement between now and July to really make sure people are focused on getting into the regulated system. An interesting note about this too is during the transition period, both the adult use, the A licenses, and the medical use, the M licenses, will be able to do business with one another. Once we get into the fully regulated market past July, only A licenses cultivators will be able to deal with A license distributors and A license retailers, and M's will have to stay with M class as well.
Yeah, this is going to be hectic. No disrespect to these California operators, but a lot of them don't have the business acumen. They're not prepared for this. They're incredible ambassadors of the industry and phenomenal cultivators and know their product and do wonderful things. But this is really going to hurt them.
It really will, and I don't think what they realize is that the cost of compliance, whether that's actual dollars spent or the time and the resources that you use from people in your office to ensure compliance, is incredibly burdensome. So here's a free pitch. Call us. We can help you.
Wonderful. Question number 2, true or false? The transition period product doesn't have any packaging, labeling, or testing standards.
I think that's pretty clearly false. I think these emergency rules are set up to kind of move people into the market. So there are certainly, it doesn't, the product doesn't have to go testing right away. They're still developing how that's going to look, how the samples will be taken, the testing parameters. But it must meet certain packaging and labeling and content standards that are already established in the emergency rules.
Well, and just to kind of retread some other previous interviews that we've done with you, you can no longer purchase manufactured good. It had been manufactured in 2017. You can't buy from a non-licensed manufacturer right now either.
Well, we'll get to that question next.
Okay, we'll get to it next. Okay, wonderful. So that one's false. Okay, during the transition period, a retailer can sell to qualified patients, and retailers can sell to adults 21 and over.
That's false.
Okay.
The transition period allows the M licensees and A licensees to do business together, as we kind of just talked about before. Retailers can't sell product to, M retailers cannot sell product to anyone that doesn't have a medical card, and they can't sell. So they have to contain that within the medical market. They still have to have a medical card, but A licensees obviously can only sell recreational product. They can't sell medical product. But those two businesses can do business with one another to kind of support one another and make sure that they have product to sell to those respective classes.
And I wouldn't hold you to this, but do you see them expanding these deadlines? They've kept most of their deadlines so far. This seems like July 1st is it. It's going to be a very painful thing. Do you see them expanding that deadline?
I don't, honestly. They've been pretty clear that when the compliance periods are, when the temporary licensing periods are, and I think as much as possible, Lori Ajax is going to push to keep that set in place.
If someone's listening to this right now and they're thinking, I got to reach out to Jay, how long do you need to write their license and get them compliant?
Well, the California state license is very cumbersome, and it requires a lot of documentation that a lot of operators who have kind of been in the unregulated market in California probably don't have, whether it's standard operating procedures or employee manuals or OSHA compliance. There's a whole host of things that you're going to have to supply to the state so that they can verify that you are a legitimate, good operator. So depending on the state that they're in when they come to us, it can be anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months.
And your fees are lower than most, for sure, but they've got to give you probably at least 30 days to write each application, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's probably going to take longer than that. In fact, maybe we can get together and do another little series on this, on what some of those big ticket items are that operators are going to start having to think about now as they gear up for July 1st.
For sure. For consultants like you, it hurts us in the industry as well if they don't get their licenses. They need to continue on. OSHA and other areas, there's ways to help them and move their business along, but they've got to devote their resources and the time to this. At the very least, call an expert like yourself. Pay what it needs to be. Pay a couple $1,000s to protect a multi-million-dollar business. Makes sense to me.
Absolutely, and those are going to be the responsible operators who see the value in compliance, see the value in submitting a well put together comprehensive application packet to the state.
Wonderful. For last question for you, so true or false still, as a temporary license, I'm not responsible for tracking and tracing commercial cannabis activity.
Another false. Hey, there were no trues.
There were no trues.
They're all false.
Nothing
all
is
false.
True. Nothing is true.
This again is also falls under the emergency rules. Temporary licensees are still required to keep records. It's just not going to be in the formal seed to sale tracking software issued by Franwell, the metric system as we know it out here in Colorado. But they do have to keep as best as possible paper receipts, paper invoices, records of transactions and things like that, and that is all mandatory.
Well, and you said before, but there's a local license and there is a state license, and it's not to be confused with those two, and understanding the difference and understanding that you absolutely need both.
Yeah, that's right. And right now, there have been, a handful, probably 20, 25 temporary state license issued, and there's a whole lot more on the local licenses that have been issued. So first and foremost, you need to comply with the local rules, right? And then there's an umbrella over that for record keeping and business practices under the emergency rules issued by the state.
Wonderful. Anything else that you know on the local side of things?
No, call us. We can help you. Local rules are sometimes a little bit tricky. They don't do the best job a lot of times defining what certain words mean in the regulations, but we've got those relationships and we've been through that process and we can help you navigate that for sure.
Wonderful. Jay Kotzker, General Counsel of STRAINWISE Consulting. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time, and I want to thank all of you for joining us on this edition of The High Five.
High five.